The steady, constant tapping from the ink pen lid eventually and very suddenly reached an absolute stop. For a time, stretching almost 8 whole years, Congressman Adam Schiff had been globally recognized and largely dreaded as the absolute most expressive, well-spoken, and dangerously smooth person inside any enclosed area he chose to visit. He was a guy who used language like a surgical tool, a leader who had built an entire intimidating profession upon his supernatural talent to spin complicated, condemning stories, utilizing a tone that virtually required total blind faith from the U.S. populace. But today, inside this brightly lit hearing chamber, that notably flawless, television-ready deep tone woefully snagged in the rear of his windpipe quickly weakened into something incredibly fragile and finally perished completely while trying to pronounce one lone single syllable. He frantically tried to manually align the one piece of formal stationery he had carried alongside himself against the hard border of the glossy timber desk. Still, his usually stable palm, the exact appendage that had authorized numerous summons and directed blaming digits toward the top leaders of the nation, could just not keep the page straight. A noticeable shake had consumed his delicate muscle control. Positioned right opposite from him, divided merely by the width of the hearing table, rested a wonderfully silent, highly concentrated gentleman holding a dense, dark hide folder. This rival had never elevated the loudness of his speech one lonely instance during the whole of the exhausting early meeting. Far inside the leaves of that threatening black notebook, 2 completely distinct domestic houses were legally listed upon a certain form, and Adam Schiff had earlier promised clearly in text and facing the severe punishment for lying that every single of these separate estates remained the only singular residence he owned. Yet the destructive exposure of this particular lawful and ethical paradox would come afterwards during the gathering. Initially, the keenly waiting crowd needed to suffer the congressman's beginning lecture. May we remain completely and awkwardly truthful about the certain person that sits presently right opposite to myself, Representative Adam Schiff proudly proclaimed. The grin he now displayed on his visage appeared very rehearsed. It was the precise, measured look he carefully reserved for the broadcast lenses, an appearance that concurrently transmitted mental dominance and tolerant patronization. He continued to draw a profoundly unflattering picture regarding his opponent. He portrayed the leader as a simple rural lawyer originating from the far south in Louisiana, a guy who had supposedly established his whole vocational justice path through launching hostile litigations meant to push religious devotion inside the country's state education networks. Schiff also claimed that this fellow had previously labored for a dogmatic group which the national legal benches had strongly rejected and scolded during roughly 12 distinct times, and who currently, possessing astonishing nerve, was trying to teach the remainder of the refined governing elite about the complicated nuances governing the American charter. You stand definitely not an acknowledged charter academic, Mr. Chairman, Schiff virtually hissed, allowing his contempt to seep through the transmitter. You exist simply as a broadcaster who manages, through pure chance, to possess a current legal permit. Muted chuckling immediately traveled as a noticeable ripple across the densely crowded lines of partisan friends and backing personnel resting right after the legislator. He purposely stopped, allowing the humor to settle and permeate the sonic volume in the chamber, totally soaking up the endorsement for his ridicule. Next, using the trained rhythm of a veteran theater performer, he tilted closely toward the speaker system to execute his drafted verbal fatal strike. Plus the exact citizens that dispatched you toward this metropolis, Schiff went on, his voice firming into justified anger, those persons that yet sadly hold the fantasy that the previous executive vote got unlawfully taken, the dogmatic extremists that truly think that a varied contemporary country made of 300 million residents must be rigidly managed from one Orthodox chapel situated inside Shreveport, Louisiana. Indeed, they terribly warrant the facts now, too. Thus here, finally, stands the genuine, meaningful inquiry which the U.S. populace is busily posing this dawn. He performed a perfect, measured partial spin of his top torso to confront the main television lenses straightly. That was the renowned trained rotation which had started 1,000 network media clips. How is a guy that is held tightly upon a brief dogmatic tether by religious patriots permitted at all close to the confidential mysteries belonging to the American administration? Mike Johnson, the victim for this complex vocal attack, did not provide a rapid answer. The mood inside the hearing space remained already heavily filled by expectation. The hall was fully packed, reaching its highest safety limit allowance, long before the dawn had ever peaked above the legislative roof. Fervent civic campaigners representing different groups had queued outside during the harsh pre-dawn chill during hours simply to grab the scarce open civilian chairs, while a large, loud portion among them had come expressly to see an active leader of the Congress be methodically and openly dismantled by an expert interrogator. The assigned media benches were crammed arm to arm. Shining computer displays lit the visages of keen reporters, while over one main article regarding this dawn's clash sat previously half-drafted inside their word processors. The title sat prepared, the topical arcs remained secured in position, while the writers were just pausing for the ultimate destructive statements by Schiff to be spoken before they might strike the submit key. Schiff had strolled inside the chamber this dawn using the precise strut of a guy that marches into a territory he has already undeniably conquered. He held that ultimate certainty mostly since he had actually conquered this very hall amid these very conditions, numerous instances than he might correctly remember. During his extensive career, he had professionally destroyed males that appeared considerably brighter, greatly more seasoned, and much better equipped than the silent fellow presently sitting opposite to himself. He naturally understood that documented reality, and he strongly desired every lone individual viewing the transmission from the panel representatives down to the civilians indoors to realize that he understood it. However, Johnson rested remarkably motionless in the absolute middle of the elevated platform. The dense, dark folder stayed securely shut right ahead of himself. His palms sat peacefully clasped over its shadowy surface, showing zero anxious tension. He was not presenting a guarded grin. Concurrently, he was not scowling with fury. He just displayed the blank, unreadable visage of a veteran lawyer who had calmly endured through considerably lengthier, much more offensive introductory speeches than this particular one within legal tribunals that counted greatly more compared to the dramatic walls of a legislative inquiry. Once Johnson eventually parted his mouth to talk, the whole chamber naturally needed to tilt ahead on their seats, merely to hear the rhythm of his words. Congressman, you have lately spoken a surprisingly large amount about the idea of truthfulness during the span of the past 4 minutes, Johnson remarked, his voice empty of spite yet loaded with intent. I would really greatly wish to challenge you based upon that foundation. He fluidly parted the weighty dark folder toward the absolute first tab divider. Importantly, he failed to theatrically raise the paper high to show it toward the advantage of the broadcast lenses. He simply gazed below toward the writing and started to recite. The 20th of March, 2017. Johnson stated, strongly setting the chronology. You stand beside a civilian transmitter. While you clearly inform the U.S. populace, plus I remain citing your precise wording, now that the conclusive proof regarding partisan conspiracy sits, through your particular terms, in plain sight, not concealed inside restricted safes. not barred away from civilian sight, rather visibly sitting in clear view. He steadily lifted his stare off the writing and fixed his look upon Schiff. Can you distinctly recall uttering that exact phrase? The trained smirk sitting on Schiff's visage manually kept its form, yet the mental mechanics running beneath it immediately started to recompute the path for the day. I recall proving incredibly correct regarding a large quantity of crucial issues which this governing chamber obstinately declined to. That remains an extremely basic two-part inquiry, Johnson interjected. His tone never grew in loudness or tone, yet its attention tightened toward a beam-like tip. Did you directly inform the nation the proof sat in clear view, yes or nay? Schiff stiffened visibly, trying to preserve his hostile stance. Indeed, plus I strongly support all. Thank you, Johnson noted evenly, instantly ending Schiff's effort to twist the story. He quietly flipped the weighty sheet in the folder. Thus, I will decide to believe you totally on your promise this dawn. Until this particular inquiry concludes, I will methodically reveal to this panel absolutely all that was actually resting in clear view. We shall review the intrusive spying programs you officially approved. We shall review the monumental rebuke ballot your personal governing chamber effectively passed towards yourself. Plus, we shall review one exact sheet of lawful documentation slated towards the close portion of our duration, wherein you individually promise facing the harsh punishment for lying that double, completely separate domestic homes situated within totally distinct physical regions served respectively as the lone single dwelling you owned. Johnson allowed the weightiness from this thorough outline rest deeply within the atmosphere. You have spent 8 lengthy periods towards vocally labeling different guys deceitful congressmen. I have carried the extensive record regarding yourself today. Thus, may we peruse across it jointly. For the absolute initial moment this dawn, the expected ripple of chuckling by Schiff's friends failed to appear. The fervent campaigners that had queued outside within the icy blackness prior to sunrise moved awkwardly upon their rigid timber chairs. The veteran journalists filling the media balcony suddenly ceased striking their semi-drafted, pre-arranged articles while began genuinely observing the energy in the space instead. Writers hold a special natural talent to sense a massive story pivot straight below themselves, responding through the precise identical way a veteran mariner senses a sudden change within the breeze path. Plus, that specific tail had newly acutely swiveled opposed to the guy that allegedly commanded the hall. Schiff's signature grin remained functionally yet visible upon his visage, yet it had just and completely ceased transmitting whatever significance, displaying merely an empty shield representing assurance. The silent signal radiating off the leader's platform appeared obvious. When you recently observed an active, intensely potent legislator become aggressively fed his personal past statements directly over a panel desk, give deep focus, since we remain just at the absolute initial sheet inside that massive folder. Johnson placed his bare hand perfectly level over the presently exposed section, performing the exact bodily motion a veteran court lawyer utilizes while highlighting a crucial item regarding proof he entirely plans to loop around toward afterward. May we begin the evaluation using precisely whatever you performed toward a civilian, regular U.S. resident called Carter Page. At the initial moment this dawn, Adam Schiff anxiously grabbed at the steel lid from his costly ink pen. He tapped it singly, one crisp steel noise resonating faintly. Carter Page stands definitely not some guy that half among this specific crowd shall organically weep about, Johnson admitted frankly. He officially labored within a polarizing Trump partisan drive. He repeatedly conversed with Soviet citizens. These exact elements created him an extremely simple victim. Plus, you, legislator, comprehended greatly more than anybody else living inside Washington, D.C. Precisely ways to grab a deeply simple guy while mutate him towards a scary federal warning. Johnson avoided gazing down upon whatever drafted scripts when giving this soliloquy. He was an accomplished tribunal attorney for roughly 2 decades before he initially sought a civic seat, and the absolute vital teaching he had assimilated across that period remained that any counsel who continually requires to consult his texts has already functionally forfeited the psychological belief from the panel. Therefore, behold exactly what occurred, explained using clear, understandable phrasing for the people currently tuning in indoors. Johnson resumed, during the calendar 2016, the absolute most potent, prying, plus digitally developed monitoring apparatus upon the surface of the globe was purposefully aimed upon a regular U.S. inhabitant. That wasn't a guilty, traitorous infiltrator. That was an everyday voter. 4 completely distinct occasions, an incredibly covert, restricted tribunal lawfully authorized the penetrating action of observing his every step. He tactically delayed. The lone, single noise existing inside the borders of Chamber 110 was the minute, recurrent snap of the pen lid inside Schiff's grasp. Afterward, ultimately, the independent reviewer general of the Justice Agency returned into the records and carefully perused those exact wiretap requests word for word. Do you hold the awareness of whatever he found, Congressman? The reviewer general's formal document got described through several very distinct ways, yet it held Johnson halted and placed the exact figure directly into the dialogue like a dense rock. 17 separate mistakes and obvious exclusions. 17 distinct occasions that covert, highly formidable tribunal was fed something obviously false by the state, or got intentionally blocked from learning something it strongly required to understand to render a valid ruling. A federal magistrate, namely the controlling judge over that very spying tribunal, later stated that the federal agency had, and I remain utilizing her exact phrasing now, deceived the bench concerning an American that was never once indicted with one lone, solitary offense. He allowed that crushing recap hang for a protracted span, giving the crowd to process the magnitude regarding the misuse. Plus, once he talked once more, his rhythm felt remarkably slower, purposely addressing straightly towards the watching masses. Reflect deeply regarding whatever that actually signifies for one single moment. Picture if it was yourself. The federal administration independently determines it owns the power to violently review your personal correspondence, electronically overhear to all of your private voice chats, relentlessly monitor precisely wherever you travel, plus carefully map every human you encounter. They perform this 4 occasions completely, constantly extending a mandate which a federal magistrate would afterward publicly declare was basically founded upon assertions which purely were not factual. Plus, at the absolute conclusion of all this staggering invasion, absolutely zero unlawful indictment, 0 confirmed infraction. Only a civilian citizen having his whole private plus vocational existence flipped completely inside out, purely because his identity proved extremely handy during an extremely handy governmental time. He gazed back upward, fixing sights upon the legislator. This frightening situation could truly occur toward a guy residing within this liberated republic, Congressman. It factually occurred toward that particular guy. Plus, the exact detail you openly remarked regarding it, the exact paperwork you voluntarily attached your private signature upon, was that the entire monitoring process proved flawlessly, spotless, plus warranted. He elegantly pulled forth another page of stationery off the folder, yet failed to recite off it presently. Moreover, the exact paperwork you boastfully fluttered towards the broadcast lenses for 3 continuous years, the specific item you officially recited upon the permanent historical registry of this United States legislature on that morning during March. It held a specific title. It got broadly recognized as a file. It remained basically a heap of totally unproven, scandalous allegations stitched together through an overseas partisan agent. Plus, importantly, It got heavily funded via a complex network of attorneys straightly from the camp of your favored nominee's governmental rival. It represented adversarial digging, Congressman. It was requested, purchased, plus funded. That remains precisely whatever it represented the moment it got initially penned. Plus, that remains precisely whatever it remained after the Mueller probe finished, after the Durham probe finished, plus after everybody otherwise had reviewed it. Still, you purposefully failed to inform the nation it was simply adversarial digging. You purposefully failed to inform them, whoever finally settled the tab for its production. You boastfully waited beside a civilian transmitter and gravely dictated it into the lasting ledger of the Republic, precisely as though a pledged observer had lawfully certified toward its absolute truthfulness. He cautiously laid the sheet downward. He afterward systematically brought his attention toward the exact figure he had presented, since that digit was the mental hook he desired the viewing populace to bear indoors. Schiff remained a guy that notably boosted himself regarding careful exactness, regarding catching the syntactical punctuation perfectly correct within every phrase. 17 stood the indisputable mathematical number that violently flipped that massive intellectual hubris toward a stark, unavoidable accusation of ineptness or spite. Plus, exactly wherever were you situated while that widespread misuse was occurring. You remain the one lone guy within the whole nation whose explicit duty profile was to lawfully prevent precisely this sort of misuse of covert state authority toward an average, unprotected resident. That terrible overstep happened directly upon your shift. Plus, rather than fiercely halting it, you penned a biased report. You officially issued it towards the populace. Plus, you boldly told the Republic that the complete process remained flawlessly spotless. I failed to manage the day-to-day actions for the Bureau. Mr. Chairman, Schiff countered, his tone recovering a bit regarding its recognized crispness. I failed to personally pen those monitoring requests. The precise mistakes you continually, repeatedly flutter about were the exclusive fault regarding the agency. You are frantically attempting to drape a massive national institution's administrative blunders over the collar of a guy that certainly failed to commit them. Nay, Johnson blankly corrected the man. I am firmly draping your personal report straight over your collar, Congressman. You stand completely correct that you failed to personally draft the original mandate. Yet you thoroughly reviewed it. You plainly viewed whatever lay held inside it. Plus, then you intentionally marched forth ahead of 300 million citizens and guaranteed them it remained spotless. The national agency committed the terrible mistakes. You fiercely pitched them towards the masses. It remains not their signature affixed upon the public comfort. It remains yours. He fluidly flipped the weighty sheet from the folder yet again. Thus here sits the precise section I terribly desire the individuals viewing indoors to mentally grip onto. You failed to simply approve this process silently out of public view. You purposely appeared upon federal broadcasts over 3 prolonged years. You gazed straight inside the camera glass. Plus, you informed them that the indisputable proof regarding an active leader purposefully plotting alongside a hostile foreign state was resting in clear view. You certainly claimed you had individually viewed it. He clasped his palms jointly. Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller utilized 2 grueling years frantically searching for precisely whatever you claimed was already resting in clear view. He factually failed to locate a felonious plot. Special Prosecutor John Durham later utilized 4 additional grueling years searching for it. He factually failed to locate it either. 2 heavily funded investigators working on totally opposite sides from the partisan and judicial range, plus neither single of those could find the exact item you gravely pledged you had previously viewed through your personal eyes. Plus here, Schiff temporarily recovered his balance again. He shifted fiercely inward toward the transmitter, plus his renowned broadcast tone returned full, deep, and confident. Special Prosecutor Mueller thoroughly recorded several intensely concerning encounters among the Camp Plus Soviet espionage operatives, scores of them. I never once legally claimed a felonious plot inside a tribunal of justice. I steadily stated the behavior remained profoundly disloyal. I steadily stated the Republic definitively warranted to learn regarding it, plus I stood completely correct to fiercely insist that we discover the reality. You may elect to scoff regarding that reality, Mr. Chairman. Posterity absolutely shall not. It was a strong block. It manually connected within the space. A backing hum quickly traveled across the progressive half of the balcony. It was the absolute initial true noise of energy they had generated. An assistant bobbed enthusiastically. For one tight, caught breath, the whole chamber abruptly recalled that this exact guy had strolled into comparable spaces completely constructed to sink him, plus had previously strolled forth appearing larger, tougher, and much vindicated than whenever he entered. Johnson, though, failed to try to hurry his reply. Whenever a veteran testifier ultimately tosses the heavy strike he has been noticeably charging up, one ought to allow it travel entirely across the room, plus burn its force before one returns it. Encounters, Johnson echoed softly, almost reflectively. Encounters stands certainly not the term you utilized upon broadcasts, Congressman. You failed to inform the U.S. populace there remained simply encounters warranting a deeper glance. You clearly informed the Republic the definitive conspiracy was resting in clear view. Those remain factually, not the identical phrase. Plus you, out of everybody, being a past veteran litigator, comprehend precisely how astonishingly distant apart those pair judicial ideas rest. He softly struck the document ahead of himself. The proof was in clear view, you boldly claimed. Well, you stood precisely half correct. It merely was not anywhere close to wherever you directed. Plus next, Johnson deliberately placed his vocational politeness completely away for a short, savage instant. You failed to state it simply could prove factual. You failed to state you held a logical doubt that was lawfully deserving pursuing downward. You clearly claimed you had viewed it. Plus, as an immediate consequence, households throughout this nation furiously ceased talking toward one another regarding the terrible details you informed them you had viewed. Next-door residents brutally attacked residents for seasons regarding an imaginary notion that two distinct, heavily backed investigators went hunting for, plus could not numerically locate. The quietness which succeeded remained thick, plus merciless. It proved the specific, clear noise of a potent guy being compelled to hear his personal, boastful statements stride fiercely back over the desk towards him. Johnson remained presently, systematically flipping the divider toward the coming section. Plus, whilst we stand deeply conversing important items you openly stated that simply were not factual, he transitioned cleanly. May we dedicate some moments discussing the exact guy that held the primary awareness. The autumn of 2019, Johnson launched, establishing the past backdrop. An informant grievance suddenly arrives that quickly turns into the base for the initial removal of an active leader in 20 lengthy years. You fiercely directed that process. You stood its lead inquisitor, its primary designer. Its intensely prominent visage aired upon all broadcast monitors across the Republic. Plus, throughout that period, you got straightly questioned over federal broadcasts. A highly simple, basic inquiry. Did your congressional panel, your private personnel, or anybody straightly laboring for you have whatever communication at all alongside the informant prior to that official grievance legally reached? Can you remember your exact reply? I distinctly recall replying the inquiry prudently, like anybody within my exact situation. Schiff began to dodge. You answered nay. Johnson severed him down. The absolute final trace of vocational politeness completely disappearing off his tone. Plus, it stood a glaring falsehood. Your personnel had definitively remained within direct communication long prior to the official grievance was submitted. You closely understood the guy who knew the detail initially, plus you gazed inside a lens and informed the whole nation you failed to. You stood not facing the pressure of agony. You stood not fibbing to preserve the existence of an infant. You simply uttered a totally unnecessary, calculated falsehood upon a regular Tuesday regarding a trivial administrative detail which would have been completely ignored by Friday, purely because you hubristically determined that the reality remained whichever exact tale supported your governmental wants over the coming 90 moments. He placed a pair of his palms perfectly flat upon the exposed folder, leaning his physical mass into the charge. Plus, you ought to deeply comprehend exactly whatever that exact falsehood mathematically affected, Congressman. That initial grievance quickly morphed into an executive removal. A removal embodies the absolute harshest, most impactful deed this Chamber of Representatives may perform towards an active leader. It rests constitutionally intended to remain the one lone procedure within all of U.S. democratic framework which no one can reliably label manipulated, because the past risks remain simply too devastatingly enormous for whatever less compared to totally spotless palms. Plus, you directed it. You remained its absolute inquisitor. Plus, the whole period you remained directing it, you stood solidly planted upon a core detail which you had recently informed the broadcast lenses was not true. You coldly grabbed the absolute serious, strict tool we hold within our democracy, plus you purposefully triggered it with a glaring falsehood regarding exactly whence it started. Right here, within this precise instant, it proved the initial moment, all dawn, that the lawyer's frosty, vocational composure shattered open to expose something violently warm and truly enraged underneath. This remains the undeniable trend here, Congressman. You were not merely reckless. You were not briefly bewildered. Every lone occasion, you purposefully determined the partisan tale remained valued vastly more compared to the undeniable truth. You performed it towards a civilian citizen alongside FISA. You performed it towards a national bench. Plus, you performed it towards every lone laboring guy, plus lady who unknowingly powered up their broadcast, plus completely trusted the profoundly solemn chap donning the black outfit, since surely they pondered a guy holding that amount of composure, a guy that unbelievably careful, a guy that incredibly never elevated his tone. Surely that guy would not simply invent it completely. He allowed the psychological mass of the deceit land firmly within the space. They believed the complex disguise you donned. Plus, you donned it precisely like a guy who understood exactly what kind of influence had purchased him. Johnson flipped toward the coming divider without skipping a step, the 21st of June, 2023. The United States Chamber of Representatives performed a deed it has executed upon solely a tiny fraction of its personnel across the past 100 years. It officially reprimanded you. The final tally was 213 against 209. They lawfully compelled you to wait within the floor of the storied hall, whilst the scathing scolding got delivered straightly towards your visage. You stand only the third representative to get reprimanded this whole 100 years. That was not a simple upset post. It was not a biased media handout. It was an enforced monumental tally. The exact body you profess to represent decently during 2 decades formally attached its title to one crushing conclusion: that you had purposefully plus deliberately deceived the U.S. populace, plus presently forced into a trap. Adam Schiff hurled his absolute fiercest returning blow of the morning. He manually spun his entire physique perfectly toward the television lenses, fixing upon those via pure partisan reflex. Plus, the renowned, thunderous tone packed the whole space. That exact reprimand tally was a completely biased, fabricated trick. Plus, completely every lone, truthful individual living inside this space realizes it, Schiff roared. his visage reddening with true fury. 213. Conservatives tallied for it. 0 single progressive. 0. There stood 0 official inquiry. There stood 0 offering of proof. It stood purely a partisan penalty regarding my success in opposing a perilous guy, which your exact faction has dedicated a whole decade blindly defending. Plus, alongside this peak, he fiercely waved his arm toward the heavy folder, toward Johnson straightly, plus toward the entirety of the observing hall. The truly genuine inquiry the U.S. populace ought to busily be posing currently is exactly why an active leader of the Congress is openly operating the private vendetta tasks of a past leader who has strongly desired me completely ruined since the absolute initial day I forced him to answer. I have never been officially indicted concerning one lone judicial violation. Do you truly comprehend why? Because there exists definitively 0 meaningful there. That is definitively not a valid scrutiny meeting. That is a synchronized partisan assault. Plus, you understand it. That psychological outburst more than connected. It exploded. The progressive half of the balcony immediately sprang awake. Enthusiastic palms began to loudly strike before hurriedly restraining themselves, plus pausing. A veteran journalist who had earlier been storing away his gear rested securely back inside his seat. A single of the junior, less seasoned representatives on the panel group caught himself unthinkingly bobbing in consensus prior to him deliberately noticing himself performing it. During a lengthy, intensely perilous hanging instant, the psychological weight of the whole chamber slanted violently beneath Johnson. It slanted within the exact manner a strained tribunal abruptly slants whenever the defending counsel connects the one flawlessly crafted point the panel has been silently, strongly waiting to absorb. You might manually sense the force of the dawn begin to glide irreversibly backwards toward the very guy that had effectively commanded a dozen mornings precisely like it within the history. Johnson let the slant to occur. He failed to frantically struggle opposed to it. He had gleaned a lengthy period past inside vicious tribunals that the counsel who noticeably freaks when the atmosphere of the space swivels remains, the counsel who finally forfeits it forever. Thus, he just rested, plus paused. He paused calmly until the unplanned striking had totally expended out of force, until the dense, waiting quietness came back, plus became heavy once more. Plus, merely then did he fluidly part a highly slim backup binder, plus softly set 3 distinct pieces of stationery perfectly level upon the desk, resting them singly at a moment, precisely like a veteran game participant distributing out a grip he previously understands holds the victorious cards. You vocally claimed it remained entirely faction border. Thus, allow me completely remove the idea of partisan faction off this formula, Johnson rebutted fluidly. I hold 3 exact identities here. Inform me exactly which single of those 3 persons remains an enrolled conservative. He softly fingered the initial form. Michael Horowitz, the reviewer general. He got clearly designated by a progressive. He got later retained by a conservative. He remains a neutral professional guy. He stands the exact person that located the 17 massive mistakes. Not me. He fingered the next. The controlling magistrate of the National Spying Tribunal, a permanent national magistrate who remains clearly pledged to prefer 0 partisan faction. She remains the person who formally recorded that the national agency purposefully deceived the bench. Not me. He fingered the final. John Durham, a special prosecutor lawfully designed off the base up to remain fiercely autonomous. He fiercely chased for your guaranteed conspiracy during 4 lengthy years, plus finally returned completely empty-palmed. Not me. He next carefully adjusted the 3 separate pages into a lone, perfectly straight little pile. It proved the precise, careful, physical motion that Schiff personally had been anxiously performing alongside his personal lone piece all dawn continuously plus absolutely nobody living inside the hall overlooked the powerful optical paradox. You strongly desire this to remain a tale of insane conservatives fiercely opposed to you, Congressman, since that remains truly the lone partisan clash you have ever really comprehended ways to conquer. But a professional reviewer general remains definitively not a conservative. A permanent national magistrate remains definitively not a conservative, plus the undeniable reality simply fails to hold a biased faction badge at all. That remains the intensely troublesome detail regarding existence. It simply rests silently inside the formal record, purely standing, factual, calmly waiting for someone possessing the bravery to finally pronounce it out clear. The perilous slant of the chamber went plunging back toward flat even. The cheering never restarted. Schiff frantically attempted to locate the missing strand once more. The reviewer general additionally clearly determined the starting probe was correctly founded, an intensely crucial detail which you completely, easily, correctly founded. Johnson bobbed deliberately, conceding the partial reality, plus concurrently filled completely with 17 massive mistakes. Pair of those completely conflicting realities live right alongside each other inside the precise identical document, Congressman. You purely enjoy to recite the initial portion to the broadcast lenses, plus purposely conceal the next portion buried inside your table compartment. That is your entire illusion trick, isn't it? Half regarding a factual item, spoken fiercely utilizing a completely serious visage, remains valued vastly higher toward you compared to a full, complex reality. It perpetually did. The legislator could fail to construct a reply. The costly pen inside his grasp had begun shifting once more, compulsively tracing parallel toward the border of the stationery sheet, straightening it perfectly flat, continuously plus continuously. Plus then Johnson fired, straightly opposed to him, using amazingly brief, harsh bursts, leveraging the unyielding tempo of a crushing cross-interrogation. You openly issued a report, fiercely dubbing that monitoring process spotless. Yes or nay, under situation. Yes or nay, yes. The reviewer general formally located 17 obvious mistakes within it. Yes or nay. That document stands vastly more complex compared to simply 17. Yes or nay. A tense tendon shifted noticeably inside Schiff's tight chin. Yes. You continuously informed the nation the conspiracy was resting in clear view. Yes or nay? Yes. Special Prosecutor Mueller found definitively zero felonious plot. Yes or nay? Quietness, Congressman. Yes or nay? Yes. 4 yeses, Johnson announced, plus abruptly ceased, plus the sharp, fierce ceasing proved vastly harsher compared to any lengthy monologue he might have given. That summarizes the whole meeting inside your private, distinct tone. I failed to purposefully place one lone term inside your lips. The crowd purely listened to a guy reply yes 4 continuous occasions to inquiries that completely enter his personal past logic. The lead progressive upon the group, a veteran representative who had utilized the whole dawn alongside her limbs, securely crossed, plus her visage rigidly composed into guarded, blank coldness, silently stretched ahead, plus pushed her personal transmitter roughly 1 centimeter farther off from herself. She failed to throw a look at Schiff. She glared emptily toward the little pile of 3 sheets, plus she gave definitively zero vocal backing. Schiff plainly viewed her bodily retreat. The entire chamber viewed him manually digest her desertion. He lifted upward his ink pen, tapped it once more, plus then once more, noticeably quicker. Johnson placed his hands firmly over the black folder. I will be fair to you, Congressman, he stated, because playing the victim has worked for you for a long time. Many people walked into this room ready to believe it. Looking directly into the television cameras, he continued, let me be clear about what I am not doing. I am not here because of your political party or the people you represent. Those are your shields, and you use them well. For 8 years, whenever someone got close to your truth, you spun the narrative and made them the story. You are the best at that diversion, but that tactic only works on subjective opinions. You cannot spin hard facts. The number 17 remains 17. A censure remains a censure. And a legal document featuring your signature at the bottom does not care how incredibly good you are on television. I did not bring my opinion. I brought your sworn documents. I am just the man holding the file. You think they will thank you? Schiff whispered, his voice faint. You think you have won? No, Johnson replied. Nobody wins a dark morning like this. I believe the truth is finally being spoken. Johnson read from the folder. May 2025, a criminal referral from the National Housing Bureau. The charge is that from 2003 through 2019, you systematically forged financial and real estate documents to illegally secure better financial terms. The division found a continuous cycle of dwelling deception across 5 separate mortgages. Gesturing toward the screen, Johnson displayed 2 documents. This first form is a loan application for a massive Potomac mansion. Under oath, you swore it was your primary dwelling. Simultaneously, this second form is a tax exemption request for a Burbank condo during the exact same years. You similarly swore it was your primary dwelling. Both cannot be true. One signature is a federal lie. You own 2 homes and swore each was your only one, merely to manually save money. You were not fighting corrupt people. You were definitely one of them. Schiff frantically argued that coastal regulations remain confusing and blamed his accountants for an error. That might be a decent defense. Johnson dismantled it if it were just one document. But you did not list the Maryland house as a secondary home until 2020. For 17 years, that estate was your only home on official paper. Johnson set the trap. Is the Maryland residence your primary dwelling? Yes or no? Schiff gaped completely silently. Is the California unit your primary dwelling? Yes or no? Schiff desperately faced the cameras. The true inquiry, he stammered. His famous voice died. He gulped. The true inquiry. He gasped. He snapped his pen nervously. Nothing came out. The smoothest Washington man produced absolute zero sound. Nobody helped him. Johnson slowly stood up. You chased a deceiver for 8 years, he declared firmly. The fake you hunted was definitely yourself. The mallet then dropped. Peers eventually abandoned the congressman.